Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Imagine a place. It's been part of the United States for what, over a century now? People there, they carry U.S. passports, they serve in the U.S. military at incredibly high rates, really high. But they can't vote in federal elections, and they aren't granted birthright citizenship automatically. That's American Samoa. And today we're doing a deep dive into its very unique and, well, often contradictory status. Our goal here, our mission with this deep dive, is really to untangle these complexities. We'll look at American Samoa's history. It's a long and honestly surprising journey. We'll explore its current unincorporated territory status, this ongoing debate about decolonization, self-determination, and also the really fascinating interplay between traditional Samoan culture, that's Fa Samoa, and the significant U.S. influence, particularly its powerful military presence. We want to examine all the different perspectives, including those within American Samoa itself, to understand why this small group of islands is still central to this big international conversation about colonialism, even now in the 21st century.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating here, I think, is how this whole situation really challenges our usual ideas about sovereignty, about belonging. We'll be digging into the legal framework that underpins it all, the incredible cultural resilience of the Samoan people, and of course the strategic importance. All these things contribute to this really deeply nuanced picture. And just so you know, our insights today are coming from, well, a pretty rich stack of sources, historical analyses, anthropological studies, and also contemporary articles looking at decolonization and territory status.
Okay, so given this striking paradox, this status, the natural question is, how did they get here? And to really unravel that, I think we have to start with a foundational legal puzzle, the insular cases.
Ah, yes, the insular cases. Early 1900s, these were a series of Supreme Court decisions that basically, well, they kept the political status of U.S. territories deliberately ambiguous.
Ambiguous how?
Well, crucially, they decided not to grant residents the same constitutional rights as people living on the mainland U.S.
Right, so for American Samoans, this means they're U.S. nationals, but not citizens.
Exactly. They can get a U.S. passport, they can enlist in the military, and they do, in huge numbers.
But no vote in federal elections and limited access to certain federal programs like some welfare benefits.
Precisely. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the insular cases were, quite clever in a problematic way. They essentially allowed the U.S. to hold on to territories, colonies really, around the globe without having to explicitly call itself an empire.
Sort of creating this gray area.
Exactly. This temporary yet lasting kind of transitionary status, which, as you said, has now lasted over a century.
So we have this enduring legal ambiguity stemming from those cases. How does that still play out today? Especially around something as fundamental as citizenship. I'm thinking about recent court cases like Fides Manu v. United States just a couple of years ago and Tua v. United States back in 2012.
Right. Those cases really bring it to the forefront. And the Fides Manu case reveals something truly profound and maybe counterintuitive for many listeners.
What's that?
It wasn't just outside pressure. The American Samoan government itself actually appealed the lower court decision that would have granted birthright citizenship.
Wait, the government appealed against birthright citizenship for its own people. Why?
Because they argued that Samoan citizens should choose their status. And, more importantly, they were worried that automatic birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment could allow the U.S. to encroach further on Samoan traditions, on Fa Samoa.
Particularly the land tenure system, presumably.
That's a huge part of it, yes. It just highlights the incredibly complex views and sometimes conflicting priorities within American Samoa. It's not a monolithic view. It completely reframes how you have to think about decolonization there.
Okay, so with that legal backdrop now clearer, let's step back. How did American Samoa even get into this unique situation, this sort of crossroads of legal and cultural influences? What does the early history with the U.S. tell us?
Well, the story starts way back. You have Dutch discovery in 1722, then European traders, missionaries. But the U.S. military is really central to the modern story, the external transformation. Local chiefs ceded territory to Tuila and Manoa to the U.S. between 1900 and 1904.
And the Navy ran things for a long time.
For 50 years, yeah.
Yeah.
From 1900 to 1950, the U.S. Navy administered American Samoa. They had a military governor, usually rotated out every 2 years, so they rarely gained deep local knowledge.
Right.
And the U.S. liked to talk about American exceptionalism, claiming it wasn't like old European colonial powers. It was about democracy, freedom.
But the reality on the ground.
Well, the evidence from Samoa and Guam, too, suggests that often looked a lot more like British indirect rule. The main interest was often easy, cheap administration, relying on local leaders, the Matai, as long as they governed in line with American interests.
And that approach, relying on local leaders but also asserting U.S. authority, must have led to clashes, undermining traditional authority, right? Even if subtly sometimes. Can you give us an example, something specific that shows how these cultural clashes played out?
Oh, definitely. A classic example is the Ipu Cup case. This was back in 1902. You had High Chief Muga Moi Moi from Pago Pago deliberately challenge the paramount chief, the Tumanua.
How?
During a traditional kava ceremony, Mauga demanded to be served using the term ipu. Now, ipu was the word reserved only for the Tumanua's sacred cup.
So, a direct challenge to his unique status.
Exactly. Mauga argued that since they were both district governors under the new U.S. naval government, they were now equals.
And the U.S. Navy.
The naval commander basically used this internal Samoan power struggle to assert U.S. rule of law. He sided with Mauga, rebuffing the Tumanua, and later, the naval government explicitly stated there were no kings in U.S. territories. It was a way to chip away at that paramount status.
Wow, that's a really clear example of an internal conflict being sort of weaponized by the colonial power. Were there other times traditional systems were directly broken down?
Yes, another one is the Skipjack affair, right at the beginning in 1900. The Navy punished a high chief, Latuli. Why? Because he had traditionally banished a junior matai for eating a specific type of fish, a malali, which was reserved only for chiefs.
A traditional punishment for breaking custom.
Yes. But the Navy intervened. They tried Latuli in their court, stripped him of his chiefly title, and basically detained him at the naval station for a year.
And the impact of that.
It fundamentally broke the authority of the high chiefs over the junior matai in that traditional context. It was seen as contributing directly to what chiefs later called a lack of respect, especially for the tradition of tatua service from younger generations towards the chiefs. They complained young men felt they didn't need to serve to earn titles anymore because the high court was starting to emphasize inheritance over service.
So these kinds of incidents, these grievances, they must have built up over time. I know this eventually led to resistance, like the Mao movement in the 1920s. That was a pretty significant anti-Navy protest, wasn't it? What were their main complaints? How did the Navy react?
The Mao movement was absolutely significant. And interestingly, it was led by chiefs like Moga Moi Moi, the same chief from the Ipu Cup case.
Really shows the ongoing tension.
It does. Their key complaints included demands for financial accountability from the Navy administration, a perceived lack of respect for the chiefs, which we just talked about. Also, critically, the fact that the U.S. Congress had never actually ratified the deeds of cession. This created a sort of legal limbo. And interestingly, they were also demanding U.S. citizenship, even back then.
And the Navy's response, was it conciliatory?
Not particularly. In one quite famous incident, known as the Feleni 17, the Navy actually used the local Samoan militia, the Fida Fida Guard, against these rebellious chiefs. They stripped them of their chiefly titles.
Using Samoans against Samoans.
Yes. And this was seen as a direct and deeply offensive violation of fa Samoa, the Samoan way of life, especially since the original cession treaties had specifically promised not to interfere with Samoan customs and laws.
This really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it?
Yep.
What does progress actually mean when you look at it through these different cultural lenses?
It's absolutely critical to consider. And to understand this, you really need to grasp the core of fa Samoa. It's built around extended families, the Aiga. These families are led by chiefs, the Matai, and governance happens through village councils, the Phonos.
And land ownership is key, right?
Hugely important. As of 2001, something like 90% of the land in American Samoa was communally owned, not individually. And there's a requirement you need to have at least 50% Samoan ancestry, Samoan blood, to have rights to use communal land.
Wow, 90% communal.
Yeah. The Matais, the chiefs, they're central figures. They're seen as honorable trustees of this communal land. And many of them hold dual roles. They're traditional chiefs and they're politicians in the Phono, the territorial legislature. So traditional customs, fa Samoa, still governs so much of local life. Dispute resolution. It's very much alive.
Which means that the language outsiders often use words like transitional or modern when they talk about societies like American Samoa. That can be really problematic, can't it?
It absolutely can be, because it implicitly sets up this hierarchy, right? It suggests that indigenous traditions are something backward, something to be progressed from, with Western models seen as the endpoint, the goal.
Right. It makes you think if that Western idea of progress isn't actually what American Samoans themselves want, then is it really progress at all? Or is it just another form of, well, forced hegemony? And that's why even well meaning outsiders pushing for, say, independence can be just as imposing as those pushing for full U.S. incorporation if it denies the actual agency of American Samoans to decide what's best for them.
Exactly. Their choice might not fit neatly into the boxes outsiders expect, whether that's full independence or full integration. And we saw this agency play out very clearly with the 2007 Future Political Status Study Commission. They looked at everything.
What were the options they considered?
Becoming an incorporated U.S. territory like Guam was aiming for then, becoming a commonwealth like Puerto Rico or the Northern Marianas, statehood, independence, even reunification with independent Samoa next door. They explored it all.
And their recommendation?
After all that study, the commission recommended continuing the current unincorporated status.
Sticking with the status quo, why?
Their stated reason was crucial: to preserve our land and title system. This shows a deep, deep suspicion of getting too integrated into the American system. They recognized that changing that land and title system, which U.S. law would likely force if they became a state or incorporated territory, could lead to the breakdown of communal ownership, dispossession.
So preserving land and titles.
Directly translates, for them, to preserving their culture, Samoa.
That's incredibly insightful. Okay, but there's this other massive thread running through this whole story, one that's deeply connected to Samoan society, the U.S. military. What's the history there? How did the military become so embedded?
Well, the militarization really started right from day one of U.S. involvement. The Navy set up the Fida Guard back in 1900. This was a paid, volunteer militia made up of Samoans, and it quickly became a symbol of status.
Who joined initially?
Early on, members were often chiefs themselves, or the sons of high-ranking chiefs. So it integrated really well with the traditional Samoan concept of tatua, of service. Service to the community, service to the chiefs, now service in the Guard.
And it became a career pass.
Highly respected one, yes. It offered a good income, benefits, things that were often hard to come by otherwise in the local economy.
And this pride in military service, it's summed up in that phrase, Tua o Samoa, right? Warriors of Samoa. The statistics are just staggering. American Samoans have one of the highest, maybe the highest per capita rates of military enlistment, and also, tragically, deaths in recent conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan, higher than any U.S. state or territory.
It's incredible. And the community support for their soldiers is just immense. You see it everywhere. Yellow ribbons, special church services, memorials dedicated to the fallen. There's even that poignant example from our sources. A car rental agency started by the widow of a soldier killed in Iraq. She used the death benefits to start it.
And named it
Tua Samoa, Warriors of Samoa.
Wow. That really hits home. The human cost, but also the resilience, the pride.
Absolutely. And the military benefits things like health care through TRICARE, child care assistance, the GI Bill for education. These are hugely significant for many Samoan families. They provide opportunities, stability, and this connection starts early. There are JROTC programs in the high schools, ROTC detachment at the community college, actively preparing students for military careers.
So this deep, deep military connection. What does it mean for American Samoa's relationship with the U.S. on a bigger strategic level?
Well, it connects interestingly to this concept from the sociologist Michael Mann. He talks about the U.S. as an incoherent empire.
What does that mean, incoherent empire?
His idea is that the U.S. doesn't rely on direct, formal colonial occupation like the old empires. Instead, it relies on a global network of military bases. He calls them footprints or lily pads. This often makes the U.S. presence seem almost invisible day to day in some places, but it's always backed up by military power.
And American Samoa fits into that network.
It does. Even though it might be seen as a minor player compared to, say, Guam, it holds real strategic importance in the Indo-Pacific. Think about the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. Having a foothold there matters. And with increasing tensions with China, its importance is probably rising.
There was a new Coast Guard installation there recently, wasn't there, in 2022?
Yes, exactly. That reinforces its role as a crucial military and strategic site for the U.S.
So this raises a really important question, doesn't it? Does the U.S. really want to decolonize these places? Or is maintaining that strategic military influence the bigger priority, especially in critical regions like the Indo-Pacific?
It's a central tension. Fully withdrawing, truly decolonizing in the sense of cutting ties, would require the U.S. to, well, swallow its pride, as one analysis put it, and disengage from this very strong military tradition that Ironically, American Samoans themselves have supported so heavily with their service.
Okay, so bringing it to today, where does all this leave American Samoa now? The journey is clearly not over, and new challenges keep popping up. One major concern we touched on is immigration control and those land rights, right?
Yes, there's a persistent worry in American Samoa that the U.S. might try to impose its federal immigration laws.
Yeah.
This could override their local control over who enters and resides, potentially impacting that unique land tenure system. We discussed the 50% Samoan blood requirement for communal land use.
And there's precedent they worry about.
Absolutely. They look at Hawaii, where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against ancestry-based qualifications blood rule for certain state programs related to Native Hawaiians.
So Samoans worry that if they became, say, an incorporated territory or a state, their communal land system, based on Samoan ancestry, could be legally challenged and dismantled under U.S. law.
That's the fear, yes. It's a major reason for resisting closer integration.
So it seems the central dilemma, the overarching point here, really comes back to the agency of the American Samoan people, their right to decide their own future.
Exactly. And recognizing that the U.S. arguably benefits from the current situation, too. Keeping these territories in this kind of liminal in-between political status. It allows the U.S. to avoid both the responsibilities of full statehood and the potential loss of strategic positioning that could come with full independence. It essentially upholds the legacy of the insular cases.
And it's so important to stress, as our sources do, that there isn't some big grassroots movement in American Samoa demanding independence right now.
No, there isn't. Instead, what you see is Samoans actively trying to balance their own deeply valued social and political structure, their fa Samoa, with the practical need to navigate and work within a U.S. system that historically hasn't always granted them full democratic access or control.
So this isn't a simple good or bad situation.
Not at all. The issue is incredibly complex, and I think, as we've seen today, any discussion about colonialism or decolonization really needs to move beyond those simple binaries. It has to respect the self-determination of the people involved, even if, maybe especially if their choice isn't what outsiders might expect or prefer.
Because ultimately, the American Samoan government, and it seems many of its people, prioritize preserving their culture.
Which, for them, is inextricably tied to preserving their unique system of land and titles.
Wow, this deep dive into American Samoa, it really shows us that the echoes of colonialism, they're not just dusty footnotes in history books. They are living, breathing, dynamic processes that are shaping lives and futures right now. Here's something to really think about, a final provocative thought for you, our listeners. Consider this paradox. The U.S. maintains this vital military presence in American Samoa, benefiting from some of the highest enlistment rates anywhere in the world, while at the same time withholding full U.S. citizenship from the people born there. Now, if American Samoans continue to choose their current unincorporated status precisely because it helps protect their unique fa Samoa, their communal land system, how does that complicate our traditional definition of decolonization? You know, the idea that it has to mean moving towards either full independence or full statehood. What does their choice tell us about the ultimate priorities of self-determination when cultural preservation seems to outweigh other factors for them? We really encourage you to reflect on that. Think about the nature of sovereignty, cultural preservation, and all the subtle, complex ways colonial legacies continue to persist. What might true self-determination actually look like for communities like American Samoa?